what a vibrant, revitalized youth ministry would that help a church? And I think without a doubt, as a matter of fact, in my opinion, a healthy church cannot be built without a healthy children's ministry and or youth ministry. If they're not healthy, then the church isn't healthy.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to the Revitalized Church podcast. We're excited to have you with us today. Our special guest is Bishop Brett Seals, the State Youth and Discipleship Director here for Eastern North Carolina. Brett has a wealth of knowledge. He's pastored, he has led youth groups, he has been a part of leading at an administrative and state level. So I'm excited to hear his take on church revitalization from experiences that he's had as a pastor, but also how we can revitalize our churches by breathing life into our youth groups so we can reach those young people, reach that future harvest. So I hope you'll tune in, listen to what he has to say, and thank you so much for being a part.
Amen. Amen. Well, Pastor Will, thank you so much for taking some time and I guess interviewing a guy like me. But it's an honor. It's an honor to be here with you today. It really is.
Hey, it's an honor for me to have you here. And so I got to do one thing before we get started. I told my son I would do this, and as a youth director and a youth leader, you can appreciate this.
Yeah.
My son and his friends, I noticed that I got a big boost in views on YouTube and even on Spotify. My son and some of his friends have found the podcast. And so Jacob, right. Garrett, Caden, Thomas, Michael, I appreciate y'all tuning in. You better like and subscribe to this. If you're going to tell everybody about it, you better hit that subscription button. So yeah, let's get into that. Hey, that's what it's all about, is reaching these young people. And and even if they're listening to old guys like us talk on a podcast, that's kind of exciting.
That is. Absolutely.
So again, thank you, man. The honor is all mine to have you be a part of this. If you wouldn't mind, take just a minute, introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, how you got to where you are, some of your passions in ministry, and just a little bit about who Brett Seals is.
Who is Brett Seals? So I guess I would start with this. I'm a military brat, so hopefully the viewing audience knows what a military brat is, the audio audience. My father was in the military. I was born into the Army. And spent basically all of my formative years moving around. Almost every 1 or 2 years, we would move somewhere. And so I'm 51 years old, and I've moved, I think, probably 26 different times. That's how many times that I've moved. So that's kind of been, my younger years was a lot of moving, a lot of places throughout the U.S. I grew up in the Nazarene Church. My parents actually started going to church when I was born. They were invited to come. When there was a birth announcement in the newspaper, for those of you who know what a newspaper is, I know it's kind of old school, but they had them come, and we started the Nazarene Church when I was born. So I grew up in the Nazarene Church, and as it would turn out, I joined the Army like my dad. I joined when I was 17, and I did 8 years in the Army Reserve. And I decided to move to Louisville, Kentucky, where a lot of my family was at, and there was a church there, Church of God there. And so I just decided to go there with all my family. And that's where really God began dealing with me. And I tell people that's probably where I really got saved, where I really, really turned my life around and made a decision to follow Christ. So that's where all that took place. That's where the Church of God comes into play. I met Heather there. We started ministry there. I went to school there. We actually started our family there. I was a youth pastor at the Okolona Church of God there in Louisville, Kentucky. I was there for almost 10 years. And then from there, we went to Florida, Alton Church of God in Mayo, Florida. Was a youth pastor there for several years. Went to Baltimore, Maryland, at Life Source Church. Back then, it was called Evangel Cathedral, and was a youth pastor there. And served really in Florida and in Maryland, not just as a youth pastor, but a lot of associate pastor roles, media pastor, wore a lot of hats, did a lot of different things. And while we were in Maryland for those 2 years as a youth pastor, God dealt with me, Pastor Will, for the entirety of the 2 years about becoming a pastor. And so that's where I gave up, because I was going to be a career youth pastor. That was what I was going to do. I loved youth ministry. And that's just what I was going to do. But God had something else in mind, and He opened the door. I told Him, I said, God, wherever you open the door, that's where we'll go. And He opened the door in New York. And so we ended up going to upstate New York, Saratoga Springs, which is just a couple hours south of Canada. And we began our pastoring journey in 2006. And we pastored there for, I guess it was right at 10 years. 10 years. We had most of our kids up there. We have triplets. So for those of you who don't know me, we had triplet girls there. So we have a total of 6 kids. And that's where my kids call home. Because that's where they spent a lot of their years growing up, was in New York. Probably some of the greatest years of my life pastoring. Probably learned all that I need to know about ministry. I learned when I pastored. Just such a valuable experience for me. After pastoring there in Saratoga, received a call, and we were asked to come to be the state youth directors for New York. And I really felt like this was a door that God opened. And so we made our way to Long Island, New York, which is much different than upstate New York. And we were youth directors for the state of New York for 4 years. After that, because of tenures and just the transitions that God had in mind, we went to Delmarva, DC, which is a region, Delmarva, a little bit of Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and Washington, DC. And we were there for 4 years in that region as youth and discipleship directors. And then once again, after 4 years, God opened another door, and here we are in ENC, Eastern North Carolina, serving here almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in August, and just a fantastic time.
Oh man, that's awesome. Man, you talk about the going from upstate to to Long Island. Man, I'm just a country boy from North Carolina. And you know what I'm saying? They don't allow us to travel north too often. They like for us to stop right there at that Mason-Dixon line, and we have to get an application to cross. But I know me and one of our mutual friends went up to New York one time, and we were on the upstate part. And I was like, where are we? You know, I mean, I've just turned around. They said, we're in New York. I was like, no, but really, where are we? Man, that is a beautiful state. Beautiful part of the country. A lot of it that we don't normally get to see. So I know that was a cool experience. But so you talk about your time there. You're a youth and discipleship director now. Like, for everybody that don't watch, and I hope we get outside the Church of God bounds on these podcasts, what does a youth and discipleship director do? What's your main roles?
So my main role as a youth and discipleship director is to run a youth program. So every state is probably very similar. You know, we're very event driven as far as it goes for youth and discipleship directors, or even administrative bishops. We have a lot of events. You know, we're trying to pull the churches together. So we have things like youth camps, Winterfest. We just came through a Winterfest season. There's a kids fest. There's, junior talent, teen talent, so many. Elevate, which is our youth conference, discipleship conference. The men and boys retreat. Heather's getting ready to do, Heather, my wife, is getting ready to do a girls' day out, a girls' night out. So it's very event driven as far as what we do, trying to get churches together, trying to get our kids together, trying to disciple them, trying to get, I want them to see, I guess, and maybe this is a personal perspective, I want them to see that there are teens, there are students outside of their churches and their youth groups, their circles, that believe the way that they do. They're not on an island at their local church, but there's a much larger body at work. And so, we're obviously discipleship, training, resources. Usually we're at a church almost every week, a different Sunday, different church, and just ministering and connecting, building relationships, and just trying to build the youth program here in Eastern North Carolina.
You know, it's amazing when you have conversations with different pastors that talk about how they were called into the ministry at one of those camps. So, the role that you're doing about these events is not just to stay busy. Like, these are life-changing events.
Absolutely.
For a lot of people. We've got several pastors and their wives that met at youth camp. They can share their stories. That is one of our greater impacting things. I think for me, looking out, is kids that come in, they'll spend a week there. A lot of your older kids work. I haven't been blessed. I didn't go to camp when I was growing up. The past couple of years, I've started working at it. I'd worked at it for a couple of days. A couple of years ago, and then last year I was able to spend a lot more time there, and I was amazed to see all that y'all pour into it, the the work that goes into it, and then the impact that it's having on those kids.
Yeah,
That's awesome. I know you just got back from Winterfest. I've heard some
we
great
did.
things about what happened there.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's a powerful weekend. And I think, Pastor Will, that when we take our kids out of the environment they're used to and we put them in a completely different environment with like-minded believers, that things can happen at a place like Winterfest or Youth Camp or Elevate, which is our little weekend getaway conference that we do, all the things that we do. Man, God just has a unique way of moving and impacting their lives, unlike He might in their local church and in the area that they're used to. I've seen God do it so many times, time and time again.
I imagine that's really encouraging because it could probably get daunting, all the work that you're doing. So that encouragement, and that's one thing we try and encourage pastors, in revitalization.
Yeah,
We're wanting to see results. Well,
yeah,
sometimes you're going to get tired, sometimes you're going to get burnt out, but look at the results that's coming out of it.
yeah.
It may not always be huge numbers, but somebody's life's changing.
That's right.
So that's really important. All right. So in your role, you mentioned everything that you've learned as being a vibrant pastor of all that. What was your time as a pastor in New York? Before we get into talking about youth and everything, as a pastor, put on your pastor's hat for a few minutes, because like you said,
Yeah.
you do wear a lot of them. On your pastor's hat right minute, if you were to tell somebody, all right, you're wanting to revitalize your church, what's something that you've seen work? Because you had success there in New York from our conversations we've talked about. What's that thing? What is that thing that worked? What would be your first steps?
I think as far as revitalizing a church, there's so many layers to that. There's so many things that a church could do, should do. I think one of the things that really helped us was doing ministry outside of the church. For some reason, that really sparked a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement. It caused people to come. It caused people to want to give, whether it be tithe or whatever the specific thing that we were doing. Some of the things that we did was there was a horse track, a racetrack in Saratoga, and we started developing a track ministry. There were a lot of folks that worked what they called the backstretch, and they happened to be a lot of Hispanic folks, and so we started a Hispanic ministry. And during track season, which was typically from April until October, I had a Hispanic pastor, and he was going every week. We were feeding them. We were doing big meals, lots of fellowship, and a lot of people in the community, it catches their eye. When you're not something that's so inclusive, or exclusive, but you're reaching out. We in my 10 years there at Living Waters, we planted 2 churches. One did not do as well as I'd liked. The other one did really well. But I'm just saying the more that we reach out, it just seems like the more energy. It just seems like the more folks, the more resources, the finances seem to come back into the church. And so I would say for us, and this may not be the one thing that works for everybody, but I would say this: the more that you give on the outside, whether it be missions, local or international, I think that I just think God just sees that, He honors that, and He breathes life into your church, and that's what He did for us at Living Waters.
Now I like that. Now you said you went to you had a track ministry.
Yeah.
And by track, we're talking horse racing, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
And so that keys in on me because you took them somewhere taboo for the church. We try not to talk to people about, we tell people they don't need to be gambling or doing these things. And so ministry wise, all right, we don't want to associate with that, but yet you found success in taking people and making a ministry out of that. And
Absolutely.
And, I think sometimes if we'll put down some of our guards and look, all right, where are the holes? Where are people afraid to go? Where are places that we're avoiding? That could be some of the best ministry opportunities.
Well, I mean, it is. Jesus, when He called Matthew into ministry, found Himself at Matthew's house, right? And of course, all the church folk, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, were just coming unglued. How in the world could this guy sit down and eat, associate, talk, fellowship with a bunch of sinners? And what he basically said, we're a hospital for the sick. I came to seek and to save that which is lost. And so, to me, there is no taboo place. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. Highways, byways, we got to reach. And I'm just, what I saw when we reached out, it just seemed like God reached down. Every time that we were pushing out into places, it just seemed like God always came down. And that was one unique thing about Living Waters, Pastor Will. Folks would come in and they would always tell me that there was such a presence of God at the church. They had never felt God quite like they did at Living Waters. And I don't think it has anything to do with me or a building or the worship team we had or anything like that. I think it's because we had the heart of God. And if you have the heart of God, then God's going to reside in that place. I really do.
That speaks a lot about the culture. You're being obedient. I just preached recently and I used the scripture that God wants our obedience and not our sacrifice.
That's right.
You didn't have to give up something amazing. You were just obedient and follow through with the Great Commission. And if we do that, that's one of the keys of revitalization is don't always look for something that's hard to do. Don't always look for something to feel like, go after the low hanging fruit. Where's there a place that nobody's at?
That's right. Yeah.
And that can be your thing. All right. So now talk to me about the role of youth in revitalizing a church, because for instance, there's a lot of churches, 20 to 50 people. And it's so hard to have a youth group at that size that is thriving because one, staff, two, churches that are of that size. And that's what, if you look at the demographics of most churches that are around right now, they're in that 40 to 70 type range. We don't have as many 2 to 3 to 4 to 500 number churches, but those churches that are in the 40s and 50s, it's really hard to have a dedicated, thriving youth group because you don't have the people to constantly work it. And if you do, you don't have that consistency in the kids. So how do we bridge that gap? What's something that we can do? And what is that importance? If you're in that size, where does that youth group fit in to breathing life back into that church?
Well, I guess it's kind of two questions. One is, if you don't have a student ministry, how do you get one off the ground? And then I guess part of that question would be, will a vibrant youth ministry, student ministry, children's ministry, is that going to bring life to the church? Is it worth the investment? Is that going to help the overall church itself? And I would say it absolutely does. Would a vibrant, revitalized youth ministry, would that help a church? And I think without a doubt, as a matter of fact, in my opinion, a healthy church cannot be built without a healthy children's ministry and or youth ministry. If they're not healthy, then the church isn't healthy. To me, the foundation's weak, and it may get big fast, but it will crumble quickly, because we've got to have these kids. Without reaching and discipling our students today, we're going to fail to have a church tomorrow. And so we have to have vibrant student ministries. If you look at any church of any size, and I don't think the size of a church determines how healthy it is, but I would say this: any church of any size is going to have healthy children's ministry and youth ministry, because they can't sustain those numbers, and they won't be able to sustain continued growth unless they have vibrant ministries. And so I think that's critical. I think it's critical no matter what size of church that you have. And so our smaller churches, because 75%, 80% of our churches are 100 or less. And that's not just a figure for the Church of God. That's pretty much a figure that fits all the way around any denomination. And so what a church is doing that run less than 100 folks, how do you get a youth ministry off the ground? And I was talking to a pastor here in our region. He was talking about a ministry position, and I told him, I said, what I would think about doing is developing a plan before you think about a person, because he was thinking about, who do you got? Give me a name, give me a resume. And I started thinking about it as we were talking. I said, tell me your plan. And I think that a lot of times we fail is because we don't plan. And so to me, a pastor and his inner circle people, and I know it sounds old school here, but it shouldn't be antiquated. We should really pray and seek the face of God. I think that the pastor and whoever the key leadership, the council, I don't know, whomever it may be, really need to seek the face of God, and see what God wants, as far as a children's ministry or a youth ministry. Seek God for His vision. Like what, have him lay it out, have him make it plain, think about ministry space, think about the goals that you have in mind, think about resources and finances, think about a job description, think, what would you like it to look like in a year or 6 months or 2 years? And I think that we get so focused on hiring the right person that we're failing. We don't even really have a plan. There's no job description. And I know that maybe people don't like to hear things like that. They don't want a description. They don't want you to put fences up and contain them and hold them back. But I think, at least in ministry, the 30 years of ministry that I've been in, I like to know what the expectation is. I want to know what it is you want me to do. What are the goals? What's God been telling you? And make sure that it aligns with what God's been telling me. And so that's where I would begin, not so much the person as I would the plan. And then I would say this, Pastor Will, we have seen a dramatic decrease in our availability of youth pastors, children's pastors, and even things like ministers of music, music pastors, as we've stepped into the 21st century. And there's a lot of reasons I would think that's the case. I don't want to get into all that, but the reality is, the Church of God everywhere, Assemblies of God, all my friends, man, everybody's looking for somebody. And so we don't have the availability. We don't have the pool that we can just draw from when it comes to a youth pastor or a children's pastor. And so what I'm telling a lot of pastors, first and foremost, is you need a plan. You've got to have a plan. You've got to get a hold of God, and you got to figure out what He wants. And then once you have that written down and people can get it and understand it, then start thinking about the person. And what I'm telling churches that are a little bit smaller, that don't have the resources or the finances to hire somebody, is to start thinking about the people that they have there, because the person you may need may already be there. They may already be there. And so, I think that you've got to start looking at your own flock. Because it's expensive, as you know, you've been pastoring for a while. I mean, you own your own business. It's expensive to hire people in, and so I think we've got to start looking at the folks that we've got. We've got to take an inventory. That's the word I want to use, an inventory. A lot of times we're asking God to give us all these things, and I feel like God is saying, I've given you so much. You're not even using what I've given you. And so I feel like taking inventory of what we have, whether it be people or resources, I think that we need to consider that first. You got to find somebody that has God's heart and a passion for children's and youth ministry. I mean, that's so critical. Them being aligned with you, trying to build a team, thinking about the space and making room and creating the environment where God can do what He wants to do. I think that all of those are considerations. I think that we have to, I don't know. I was looking over some of these things today, some of our talking points, and I was just thinking about, creating a launch date, and creating, not just starting something, but building excitement, trying to create momentum, utilizing things like the virtual world, like you and I are right now. We don't often use this as a means of ministry when it comes to pastoral ministry or church ministry. I think that our kids are living very much in a virtual world. They were born into a virtual world. All the Gen Zers were born into it, and the Gen Alpha. I mean, my goodness, that's all that they know. And so I think we got to get out of the box when we start thinking about youth ministry and children's ministry. But I think, again, going back to the beginning, I think we've got to come up with a plan, and then we think about the person. I think to me that has become the most critical part.
Yeah, and so I like what you said one very key thing. What are you going to do next year and then 6 years from now?
Yeah.
And I know in my instance, we're in a church now, we're in our 40s. And so, we don't have a dedicated praise and worship leader right now.
Yeah.
But my 15-year-old daughter is playing the piano and leading in that, and we didn't have a drummer.
Yeah.
And so we've got a 9-year-old little girl that has started taking drumming lessons. Is that a right word?
I don't know, but I saw your post. That's really cool, though. That's
Lessons.
Great investment.
And she's playing in the church now. She played this past Sunday, and it's so funny. She's sitting behind the drums. Her grandparents are on the praise team standing right beside her. My wife is on the front row standing there seeing her, and I'm off to the side playing the bass guitar. and she'll hit the drums 3 or 4 times, look up and smile at everybody around her, and they go and never miss a beat. But I look at those moments, and that is a blessing to the church, to her family, and to the future, because now you've got my daughter that's playing and this girl that's playing, and there's a lifetime in front of them. And so some of these opportunities that we don't have to fill these roles is a chance to train somebody, and you might not get an instant result. And there's times that we don't, that we might sound, okay, so I'll set the stage. I've only been playing the bass for a year, and there's a lot of times I'll still have the notes up on the stand in front of me to make sure I hit the right note.
That's right.
And I'll tell my wife, hey, some of these times we sounded like an elementary band. You know what I'm saying? We just had that sound to it. But we're praising the Lord. It's not perfect, but we're better every Sunday because of it. And we're growing as a church. We're growing people. And until those people come, we'll fill that role. Now, as a pastor, I can tell you that gets real frustrated sometimes when you don't have the youth pastor, you don't have the praise and worship leader. Yeah. And you're trying to do it all. So I will encourage guys, just from my experience, and I know you can't do everything.
No.
And so I think what you said is true about praying for it. Look for outside the box things. You mentioned virtual. You know, there's one thing I love about you is you don't always tell everything about yourself, and those diplomas on the wall go up a lot higher than that. Brett's got 2 different master's degrees and your doctorate degree, and I read your thesis, and you know, you wrote that on reaching teens in a virtual world, right? Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many avenues we're not taking advantage of. And in my studies of that in college and in my master's, I learned that people are more apt to connect, and this includes adults. They will connect with you online in a format like this, or in a format in a chat room, or whatever, much quicker than they will in person. So we think we're not connecting with people when we use these outside of the box things, but actually we might be connecting with them quicker. So you might not be able to have them all on a Wednesday night or Sunday night, or one of our in the box ways we've always done it. Don't be afraid to try something new.
No, absolutely not. This is the world we're living in, you know. And I won't get into the project that I did, but I do think there is a viable path to discipleship through the virtual world. I really do. And I mean, I did a project, I did research, and everything points to the fact that we may not be technically discipling in a virtual world, because discipleship is relational, it's face to face. But as a supplement, the possibilities are endless in a virtual world to supplement discipleship. And you know, the numbers I had were astronomical as far as it being effective, life changing. I mean, every measurement that I employed, it said, man, this is something that we have got to consider as we move forward. If we're going to reach these younger generations, these next generations, Alpha and Z, then we've got to think about using the virtual world. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind.
I've got a youth pastor that's just started working with me in my other business, and he was riding with me the other day, and he shared that he and a friend of his had just got in the past got PlayStations. And they got on Fortnite or what other games the other kids. He said, we have no idea how to play. He said, but that's our chance to sit there and talk to the guys and communicate with them. So anybody, let's try something different. Be willing to step outside of your bounds, do something unexpected. And you never know, it could be organic and grow into that.
That's right.
So what are some things in youth wise? What have you seen this work? I mean, I know we've talked about that, but anything specific, what you're seeing right now across the state, because you got a very broad view of what people are doing here in Eastern North Carolina. You've seen it, like you said, in Baltimore. Anything you're seeing that somebody's doing right now that we can learn from? What's something that's working, regardless of the size of the church? What are some things that you're seeing that we can try?
Well, I'll start with just kind of where we left off a moment ago. I think that the virtual world is really untapped. I think it's a huge ministry opportunity that we might be missing, and using things like social media. And I'm talking about beyond emailing or texting. although these next generations, that's how they communicate. It's through texting. It's not, through verbal communication like this. Boy, this is sometimes very difficult for these younger generations. They're not used to this, or they've not become accustomed to it like we have. And so I think tapping into the virtual world and maybe thinking about building ministry in terms of using social media. I know Facebook's so outdated, Instagram, Snapchat. I don't know, but you got to be willing to evolve with it. I mean, to me, you've got to find out what your kids are into. What are they plugged into, and then you need to be versatile as a ministry leader, and you need to figure that out, and you need to plug into it. Kind of like that youth pastor you were just talking about a moment ago. Anything about Fortnite, but I promise you this is the more that he's on there, the more that he continues to play, probably the more that he'll learn about that game. And so, I think sometimes we want everybody to step into our world. But obviously, God stepped into ours to save us. So why aren't we willing to step into theirs, to try to save them? So I think that's a huge step that we're all going to have to take. I think every church, if it's going to survive, Pastor Will, if it's going to survive, it's going to have to start thinking about doing ministry, having online campuses as actual viable campuses, that these are real people and they're really a part of your church, even though you may just see them on a screen. I think we've got to start considering that. And to me, that's the virtual parts of it. And there's so many things that we could probably talk about, and different things. There's so many folks that are doing that just seem to be so effective and productive. But I would say this: in all my years of ministry, to me, relational ministry right now is probably one of the most important, one of the most effective. Honestly, it's probably what leadership is as we're moving forward. It's relational, and so some of the most effective, I guess, probably everything I did that was effective, I dealt around ministry teams. And so what we did in youth ministry, and it still works today, and I think that everyone's doing it in some kind of way, is getting kids involved in ministry, whether it be like drama ministry, or it could be, we had a dance team. And I know maybe down south, maybe that's not as big, but up in the Northeast, that was a huge thing. We had a tech team. We had greeters. We basically, what I was trying to do is to get kids involved in ministry. And so, yes, we're trying to minister to them, but I think that we've got to get them involved in it. They've got to find a way to take ownership. And so that may look very different for different churches, but I think trying to develop teams based upon the needs that you have, and considering students to fill those needs, and to operate in those gifts, and whatever those areas may be, I think that's critical. I think it's absolutely critical. I was even thinking, earlier today, I was thinking about a creative team. What senior pastor out there is meeting, maybe, I don't know, monthly, bi-monthly, with a bunch of students from their church, and getting ideas about sermons, and what would be good ways to get my point across. How would you do it if it were you? Thinking about graphics, or thinking about media, thinking about video clips. I don't, whatever it may be. What if every senior pastor had a creative team that was just students, and they started using their input to help shape what God was trying to say to the church. I think developing teams, getting kids involved, getting them plugged in, I think that's so critical to youth ministry and to overall ministry.
And they want to be heard. So I made light of my son and his friends that had found the podcast earlier.
Yeah.
But the first thing he said was, "Hey, Dad, we found the podcast. They were all over there at somebody's house watching a basketball game, and somebody pulled it up, and there I am. Hey, look, it's Jacob's dad on podcast." And then he started offering advice. Hey, why don't you think about doing this? Why don't you think about having this as your angle? Your camera needs to be this way. And so there are. We don't need to just have kids in the building. We need to have them be a part of the church.
Absolutely.
It is amazing how progressive they are in what they know, how they know, just like setting stuff up like this podcast, or backgrounds, or filming. Like, they know so much more than I did at that age.
Oh, yeah.
It's unreal.
It's unbelievable.
And I think that's part of why, when we talk about having a revitalized church and having a healthy church, not only do you need to have them there just to cover that part of the demographic, but there's a whole blind side you're missing if they're not, and you're not listening to them.
Yeah.
We got to pay attention to these kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do they want? What do they want to hear? What do they want to see? That's our future. And so, I'm passionate about that. I get that holy frustration sometimes that we're not doing, but what we could, but I also realize it doesn't have to be done in this building. And so to a pastor that's not happy with your Wednesday nights, for instance, to having the youth group you want, go to a church. Go to a school and offer to volunteer.
Yeah.
You can reach kids and youth outside of your building. Go read to them. Go do something. Just try and reach that generation. We get stuck in thinking it's got to be inside of this box, inside the building we're at. But there's so much more that we can do.
Yeah. I agree. The ministry field, the landscape of ministry has changed dramatically. And my generation, Pastor, I'm a Gen Xer. We always measured success and we measured productivity on people coming to a building. And so that's ingrained in my brain. And even the boomers, the older generations and some of your millennials. But I think that we've got to look at new metrics, how we measure growth, success. There is so much beyond the walls. I think there is so much opportunity outside of the walls. And I think the virtual world is critical. I think every church at some point in the near future is going to have a virtual campus. And if they don't, then I wonder how long they're going to last. I think the clock is ticking. I really do.
And we're still trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, I know.
So in one of my church planning classes last fall, I had to write a paper, and I think I told you about this, I'm not sure, about what I thought about virtual baptisms.
Yeah.
And that really pushed me to think through this. Okay. My first jump was I'm extremely against this. And then so we had to watch a video, and it was two, what do you call them, avatars. They look like Lego people on a screen. And one of them is in the water, and you see this other Lego person just go bouncing down into water, and you hear actual voices, and it's a pastor somewhere in one location, a person that wants to get baptized in another location, and you hear them like, all right, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And then all of a sudden you hear the person going, oh, amen, thank you, God. And at first I'm like, man, that's stupid. You know what I'm saying? Like but then I thought about it. What about the person stuck in a hospital bed? What about the person that's an invalid that can't get up? And so that stretches our thinking. I'm not ready to go that far yet. I'm not ready for my avatar to be baptizing people online. I think that is a stretch, but I think we need to stretch our minds a little bit beyond what we know. We're probably not willing to go there, but what are we willing to do to reach people? Because God said to go to the ends of the earth, and that means it keeps stretching. Have you gone as far as you can to reach somebody?
Yeah, I think as far as a virtual church, I think we're going to have virtual campuses. I think we're going to have to start thinking in those terms. And then I think the next important hire, the next important position in church is going to be like a media pastor. So it's got to be someone who's tech-minded but has got a pastor's heart, and someone who's able to navigate the internet, the virtual world, and pastor people, as services are going on and they're messaging and they're dropping things like through Facebook, for example, they're responding to these things, taking these things into account, following up with these things, texting, sending emails, messages, and I think eventually we're going to have a campus pastor for the virtual campus. And it's going to have to be someone who really has the heart of a pastor and someone who really understands technology. I think that's going to be the next big position that we see in the church world. Now, back to your point about the avatar being baptized. Let me just say, in my research with the virtual discipleship, this is what I found, that virtual discipleship found its most productivity when we came together. There had to be a place, a point, a rally point where the group came together. and that might be a Wednesday night, it could be a Sunday morning or Sunday night, that everything that was done in the virtual world is like cemented. It all comes together when there's the face-to-face. And so what I found is you've got to have that. You've got to have the personal touch, so to speak. And I think that even things like baptism, at least for now, I'm probably with you, is that, like if they're in the hospital, then I think we need to be willing to go to the hospital and figure that out, or whatever the case may be. If they're in a different country, then we need to, I don't know, find someone who's in that country. But I still think the personal touch. Jesus spent 3.5 years with 12 guys, and it was relational. It was doing life with them, and so I don't think that could be factored out. So I think that's a part of it. I think that what made virtual discipleship so productive was the fact that everybody still came together. There were still rally points once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, where they physically came together, and that's what made it. That's what it made sense when you came together physically.
Mm-hmm. And you just like the kids. So my son and all his friends that play, they go to school together. So they're in their afternoon doing their games and doing that kind of stuff. Not as much as it used to be, but they still have their point. Like you said, they come back to school together. They have that physical interaction somewhere. So, that is important. It's important to have. That's who would have thought we'd have gone into virtual baptisms with little avatars? You never know what we're going to cover on these.
But I think you're right, though. I think we got to be open to these things. It doesn't mean we accept everything,
right.
but to immediately turn it off. When we immediately turn something off, it's almost like we lose an entire audience. We haven't just turned that thought off. We've probably turned a bunch of people off. And I think that as ministers, we've got to consider the responsibility that we have, the voice that we have into people's lives. So I think we need to be open to this stuff. I'm not saying that could never work. I'm just saying that right now, I don't know how that could work.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. It stretches us. And so that's why I think, like, when we look at children's ministry, youth ministry, when we're trying to revitalize or stop the bleeding, a lot of guys that are looking to revitalize a church, they just want to stop the bleeding point. Now, how do I keep the people from going out the door? I ain't worried about them coming in right now. I got to stop that point. And we circle our ranks and we close in on, all right, who are my tithe payers? Who are my dedicated people? And then we rally around that and we focus on that, thinking we're saving it. When in all actuality, I think, in my opinion, we're speeding up the decline and the demise if we don't. We've got to stay focused outward. I don't know if you've read the book, The Autopsy of a Deceased Church. We've got to be focused outward. Rayner did a whole study on when churches start to die. And so we've got to look at those things that grow next year and grow the year after that. We may see a little bit of a decline now, but how do we have that growth next year and we stop the bleeding? But then we can move forward, and it may hurt for a time. You're going to make some changes that people don't like. If you go and make a shift to the younger generation, there's some of your older generation that's not going to be happy.
That's right.
It's just the nature of it. Right. So make your target their families.
You have to. If you get their kids and their grandkids involved in ministry. Then the older generations, man, you're going to have a lot more buy-in every single time.
Right. If they see their kids at church, they will tolerate a lot of things that they might not have before.
Yes, they will.
Immediate. So look for your low-hanging fruit. I know we talk about here in North Carolina and other places, it's the year of the prodigal. We're looking for that low-hanging fruit. Where are our family members that aren't in church? And so when you're trying to grow this and looking for teens, look at the people in your church. And there's a lot of times that you have people that are members that are dedicated that have kids that aren't coming.
That's right.
That have grandkids that aren't coming. So call them, talk to those kids, ask the parents, hey, can I spend some time talking to them? And what do you want? What would it take to get you here to have buy-in in this church?
That's right. That's right.
So I appreciate you sharing on that. All right. So we've talked about things that worked. One thing I love to talk about because I learned so much from it. And sometimes it's transparency that we have to do it. What didn't work? What is something that you, and so, because I think other guys may try it and you may save them a step. Or you may encourage them saying, hey, I'm not alone. He failed in this too. What's something that you saw that just did not work, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I was talking to Heather. It's what's something we really busted. What's something we really, and it was early on in ministry. Not that you don't make mistakes later on in ministry, but early on in ministry, we became youth pastors at the first church we worked at, and I'll name them Paul and Paula because I don't want to say I don't say their real names because they may listen to this and be mad at me. But they were youth workers, and they'd not been coming to church very long, but they were very excited. Man, they wanted to get in. They were just man, they just seemed like such a solid couple, and they were part of our youth workers, and everything seemed great. Everything just seemed so wonderful until some of the kids started coming back to us and telling us that Paula was telling them, like we went to Winterfest, for example, and she was in a room with some of the girls, and she started telling them that her and Paul were having problems, like marital problems, and expressing this to the kids at a retreat. And come to find out, they were really having some really bad problems, and they ended up getting divorced. And it was kind of it really shook up the youth ministry because they'd kind of gotten in there. They've gotten to know kids. They had confided in kids. And obviously kids, are in those teenage formative years, emotionally can be unstable. And it took a toll on the youth ministry. And I guess the lesson that I learned, which hopefully we all have learned, is we've got to, like I said earlier, if you're even starting a youth ministry, we really need to pray more about the people that we're involving in ministry. Like you said a moment ago, Pastor Will, you said a lot of our guys are in maintenance mode and they're trying to stop the bleeding. And I think that when we become vulnerable like that, we will latch on to folks that seem like answers, or they seem like they can really do things, and we don't take the time, the vetting process. We don't pray about it. We don't take enough time to talk with them, to get to know them, to develop a relationship with them. And I think that the problem is that it could cause your ministry a lot more harm than it does help. And so, Heather and I, throughout the years from that point on, we had like applications, and we would ask people all kinds of questions, and those kinds of things, have differed from church to church. And, sometimes it was doctrinal stuff, sometimes it was personal stuff. But taking the time to know people, to get to know people, and having a process by which you check people out, because we live in a very mobile country. People are moving, and you may get people into your church that nobody in your community and nobody knows. And if you don't take the time to get to know them and check them out, then it may cause your ministry a really tough situation. So that's probably one of the tough ones that we dealt with, and that was early on in ministry. Learned I would say, a valuable lesson.
Well, I'll let you know if we get a Paul and a Paula that subscribe to the channel and make any comments. Paul and Paula, if you're watching, I'd love for you to subscribe, like, and share this. Thank you so much for.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for giving him this experience. And so that's one thing we make sure we tell people, and you'll hear people. Almost every leadership teacher will tell you their version of get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off, or to hire slowly and fire quickly. Just because a position is open, you do not have to put somebody in it right away, because you put the wrong person, especially in the church world, because we love to take ownership of this kind of stuff. You get the wrong person in a spot, it can take years to make that change. And when it does, it causes that hurt and that problem all over again. So make sure you hire the right person at the right time, or you could be over here beside me telling a story like Bishop Brett over here talking about your biggest failure with Paul and Paula.
Yeah, it was a tough one. I mean, we recovered, but I think that a lot of ministries have become desperate. You alluded to it a moment ago. And when we become desperate, we do things we wouldn't normally do. We make decisions that we wouldn't normally make. And I think that we still have to be careful. We still have to be cautious, and we still need to get a hold of God. Even if, even outside of hiring, if you just, if it's just something that you appoint someone to, it's a volunteer kind of thing. I think that we need to be careful, because the recovery could, as you said, it could take years to recover from a bad decision like that.
to me as a pastor, like hearing you say all this is probably the most relevant thing out of our conversation, because not just here at my church, we don't currently have a youth pastor. So, me and my wife will do things with the teens. Two of the kids are ours, so we'll do some things with them. But I can name a dozen other churches in the same boat right now that would love to hire somebody. They've
Yeah.
had, they've had ads out. Some of them could pay very good packages. There's just like you said, there is an extreme shortage of youth pastors.
There is.
And children's pastors, you can, a lot of times you'll have a mom in the church or somebody like that that can do that. But even in that role, a dedicated and committed person is very hard to find. We're very blessed to have a great children's pastor here. I
Yeah.
count that a really big blessing for our church. So that's why the last section I like to have in these is to talk to that new minister, talk to that new pastor, somebody that's stepping into a role. And if you want to tailor this a little bit to somebody that's thinking about stepping into youth ministry,
Yeah.
give them that encouraging word, give them your advice. Just take a few minutes and talk to that new minister of whatever position, and some encouragement as they're stepping into that.
Well, I think the one thing I would say, and the one thing I didn't do probably as well as I should have, is you need to find someone you can learn from. You need a mentor. Um, you've got to find someone that's willing to pour into you. You got to be willing to take the time for that to happen. We live in a culture that just everything is so instant, and I feel like sometimes that God works much more in seasons than He does instantly, or just in one day. And so I think that commitment, being committed to a church or a ministry, whatever that may be, whatever God may be calling you to, and to find someone who's willing to mentor you, someone who's going to pour into you, because that's, I mean, to me, that's the one thing that I wish I would have done earlier in ministry. To really humble yourself before someone, to remain teachable, to be flexible, to learn how to take criticism, and to not be all hurt and upset and walk away from it. Things like going to school. I said remain teachable. Going to school. I think I don't know that going to school is going to unlock something. I don't know that God's going to has some special anointing for people who just go to school. I don't think anything like that. But the more you give God to work with, the more God has to work with. And so I would say learn as much as you can, and whatever that looks like, and whatever that may be. And I guess the last thing I'd say, Pastor Will, is to develop healthy rhythms in your own personal relationship with Christ. I think that is critical. Your devotion time, your prayer time, Sabbath, rest time. That's one thing that I didn't have healthy rhythms. I would pray, I would read my Bible, and I would do it every day. But it was just, it happened at different times of the day. It could happen at 2:00 in the morning. I didn't have healthy rhythms, and I think that would have really helped me as I went to school, went back to the seminary, and started reading a lot. I felt, I really struggled early in ministry. I was a doer. I'm a builder. I like to do stuff, and so I was always in. No matter what we were doing, I was always in, whatever the ministry was. But when it came to the soul care, personal care, I don't think I took care of myself. I don't think God was able to develop me at a younger age, maybe the way that He wanted to. It doesn't mean that I'm not who I am supposed to be right now, but I'm just saying, looking back, develop healthy rhythms. That personal, that soul care is what they call it now these days. Find someone, submit to them, let them mentor you. Be willing to commit yourself to that. Be in it for the long haul. Be humble, be teachable, and learn as much as you possibly can.
Amen. That's some great advice. The more you know, the more you can do. We always need to be growing in that. So, Brett, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate you being willing to come on the podcast. And
Absolutely.
Share from your experience, share from your positives and negatives. I think we can all learn from each other and move forward in that. Thank you for what you do in your role at the state office. Our church is blessed by that, and I know a lot of others are. So Thank you for being willing to be on that journey,
Absolutely.
in that type of ministry. And we'll be praying for you. And again, thank you so much.
And thank you, Pastor Will. And thanks for inviting me, man. And again, I know you said it's an honor for me to be on the show with you, but it really is an honor. I always consider it an honor anytime anyone invites me to speak or be behind their pulpit, whatever the case may be. So I do, man. I love you. I appreciate the ministry that you do, and the man of God that He's called you to be, man. I really do appreciate you, man.
Sounds great. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day.